All right, welcome students to another video tutorial in client-side web development. Today we are building on our developer profile. So this would be our third installment, building up our developer profile. And if you recall from where we last left off, we have our layout, our basic layout, which is a flex box. We have all of our elements, like the nav, aside, and main, and the header and footer. And we have things like block quotes and quote tags. And we even have this placeholder image. And the last code lab, we dealt with some custom fonts and even font awesome icons. So if you recall, we imported the link to the Font Awesome CDN, or Content Delivery Network, and we had a bunch of embedded styling to achieve the output here. Okay, but for now it's pretty simple. Again, we follow that less is more philosophy, but we still want to integrate some of the stuff that we've learned up until this point. Things like graphic design or using tables, even forms. And so we're going to look at some of those things today. What students need to start with is the starter code. So in the project folder, you'll have a file name called starter code. Make sure you have a W3 School editor with that starter code in there, and then you just want to change the name to your own name. Okay. We also want to have this HTML5 Learning Resources folder open. That's right on Blackboard, and inside there, this first link you want to have open. And so this is one of our web resources, and make sure you're on the tables slide, and it will open up the presentation. And we want to be on slide 4 because this is going to give us a good visual reference to work from when we're creating our table. We also want the fontawesome.com website open because we're going to be using icons in this latest installment. And also Code Beautifier. I've already run the markup and the CSS to the Code Beautifier. It will just help with readability and changing things. Okay, so run your code through the Code Beautifier if things are clinging to the left side or all clumped together. Okay, and that's just codebeautify.org. Okay, I also want, well, you should have your GitHub open, but I have that open just because we are dealing with some files from there. Okay. Also in the project folder, we have a text file with some links. One is a link to a style sheet, and the other is a background image link. So you want to have that handy as well to complete the project. Okay. All right, so let's get started. If you see here, we kind of have an issue where we have too much CSS. So in the beginning, it was okay because we had a few of these selectors, but it's really grown to be its own thing. And ideally, in web development, you want your CSS, your JavaScript, and your markup in separate files or locations, just because it does get unwieldy. So we're actually going to do that today. So what the first step I want students to do is find the style tag, the beginning style tag, and highlight everything in between it. So don't delete the opening and closing style tag, just delete the CSS, okay? So we still have those style tags, and if you run it, our web page just goes back to lunacy because we have no CSS. But to address that, we're still inside the head here. Right underneath the CDN from Font Awesome, we're going to link in the style sheet. Okay, so let's go link relation to the document. Well, this is the style sheet, and we're going to go href, and this should be https / after the colon. We're going to go finteger github dot, I think it's .com. Yeah, it should be .com. Oh, no, sorry, IO. And this link here, the link is already in the text file, so you can literally just copy it. but the resource we want is called Portfolio CSS. Whoops. And let me just open that a little bit. Portfolio CSS, and that's good for the attribute. And we can also put in type text files slash CSS, okay? And then you want to close that off. So the link doesn't have a self-closing tag. Just close that off. And if you run that, we should be back to normal. Basically, what's inside this file is everything we deleted inside in between the style tags. The reason why we want to move it there is just because, hey, things are getting a bit unwieldy. One thing I did notice is it doesn't affect change on this placeholder image. So we might, even though if I go back, if I go to my GitHub link, so this is the file that's being hosted on GitHub Pages. The profile picture does have explicit heights here. So what I'm going to do, because it's not containing this profile picture, I'm just going to go to the style tag, and I want students to type that in there, okay? And then if you run it, then, so it is in that external sheet, but for some reason it's not being selected. Okay, so just have the style selector in there and set the explicit width and height so we can get that tamed. Okay, good. But as you can see now, our file's a lot smaller. Our CSS has gone away. It's now in this external file, or this external source. And in production code, this is exactly how you want to format it, right? Ideally, you don't want to have any sort of inline or embedded CSS, okay? Same goes for JavaScript. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, and let's just inspect the document, or the output, is we have some real estate to work with, especially in this main. So if you go to the HTML markup, if you recall, we have a main up top here, and that has the lorem ipsum placeholder text, and it's just an H2 and a paragraph inside there. But we can actually make some room for that, okay? And we're going to do so by using the grid property. So if you go on Blackboard, there is the UI or the code labs where you can learn more about this, okay? So please do. But we're going to implement that here for our table, because what we want is we want to section off this main, and we want to do it in a way that's exacting. So there's, because we don't have a whole lot of room to work with, so a grid or flexbox is a perfect choice. In this case, we're going to use a grid. So to achieve that, we are going to go into the style tags in the head and just make some space. And we're going to target the main. And we're going to set the display to grid. Okay, this gives us access to things like grid template, rows, columns, the gap, grid gap, justify content, align items, that sort of thing, just like Flexbox, except without the grid properties. And here, we're just going to set up the grid as grid template columns. Okay, so going across, and we just want 2 columns. So I'm going to set the first one up as a fractional unit, and then the rest as 40%. So what all that means is the fractional unit is just everything after that 40%. So it represents what, 60% of the main? So if you don't explicitly set it, it's going to just fill in the rest of the width there. Okay, so now if you inspect it, F12, and if you go into the main, you can see, where's the main? Sorry, it's kind of bunched up just because it's a flex box, but you can see 2 grids there. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So that's good. One thing you notice though is we have an H2 and the paragraph, and they're segmented differently. And to overcome that, because we want these together, is we wrap both of them in a div. So let's go down to the markup. Excuse me, one sec. And we're not going to give the div a class name or an ID. We're just going to find the h2, and we're going to give it, wrap it in a div, and then we're going to find the end of the paragraph right before the ending main, and we're going to wrap that in a closing div. Okay. All right, and maybe we'll just tab that over and now run it, and you can see that about me and the lorem ipsum placeholder text is now together, exactly where we want it. Okay, it's on the left side just because we don't have anything as the first div. So here we're going to put in a table so we can make some room after this div. Let me zoom in a bit. And once we put in this new div, and we're not going to use a class name or an ID, just generic div as a division. And what we put inside here now, if you run it, will be the rest of our space. Okay. All right, but we're not done with the CSS for the main, because there's some things that you'll notice, like if you collapse the main text, well, this text will actually overflow into the footer and beyond. So how do we address that? So let's go back to the main, and right after grid template columns, we're just going to use the justify content center. So that justify content center means everything horizontally will be centered inside the grids, and then align items vertically centered. Okay, so right in the middle, and that's what we want. Oh, sorry. For the line items, we're actually going to go start. Okay. So there's start, center, end, and you can imagine where those placements are for vertical. So you have beginning, middle, and end there, bottom. Okay. We're also going to set what's called a grid gap. So what's the gap in between the grid items? And we're going to set that to 20 pixels. And then to address this text that's overflowing, we're going to set overflow Y. So that's on the x-axis, up and down. And we're going to set that to scroll. You could also use auto. Okay, so that gives us this scroll bar, which we can use for any overflowing content. And you can see we have no kind of things that are looking out of place there. Okay, so that is the completion of the main. Up above this header, we're actually going to do a background image, and we're going to change the font. Okay, so one of those links in the text files provided is kind of deals with that. So let's just have the header right after the main, and we're going to use a property called background image. So in CSS, you can actually import images through the CSS, as we've seen, and we're just going to have this URL property, and inside the single quotes and parentheses, we're going to pass in our link, so our background image link. I've given you the whole property, so you can just copy and paste that from the text file. And if you run that, let's see here, banner, JPEG, header, so we have the image, great. And let's see here. Let me just account for any. Okay, so we have that. What I want to do also is background position. So once you set an image, you can actually position it to get it exactly where you want it. You can even provide things like X coordinates. Right now, the image is not showing, and I'm not sure why, but I do want to perhaps put an important, because it may be conflicting with the header or the background header color, and sure enough it is. Okay. So what you saw here is basically I used the important override. So because I don't want to touch the CSS being hosted in the portfolio CSS that we linked in. So that's the external style sheet. We had to override it with this important, okay? And we have to do the same with this centering statement, okay? So let's override that. Okay, so we have the background position, and you can see it's a picture of a laptop, which looks pretty cool, and you can really position that to wherever you want it. But you'll notice our text now is just the wrong contrast. So what we're going to do inside this header is change the font color to white in hex code. Perfect. And we're actually going to change the font family. So what does that look like? The most modern kind of built-in font that you can use without any imports is what's called Roboto. And we also want to have the family there, so sans serif. And if you run that, just make sure you don't miss the commas or the single quotes there, okay, and the ending semicolon. But if you run that now we have a more sharper, I would say, or crisper look for the header. Okay, so that's looking great. And if you recall, we already have some box shadow giving it some depth. Okay, all right, so that's it for the header. Let's keep going. Okay, the next thing is we want to head back down to our main because we have this empty div. And here we have to reference our table reference that we have from Blackboard. So you can see here what a table is essentially is you have these table tags, and then inside the table it's composed of a table head, tbody, table body, and a table footer. And inside these respective sections we have table rows composed of table data cells. But notice in the table head it's referred to as th. We just use the special tag there, th, to symbolize the table header, and that gives us kind of bold font that's centered. Okay, so a special font for the th cells. Okay. All right, so we kind of know the general outline of our table. So let's have the opening and closing table tags. And we'll kind of just give it an indent because we want to be able to read this nicely. So how does this table look? It's going to be a little intricate because basically what we want to have here is our technical expertise dealing in client-side web development. So we're going to have a table that says HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, and we're just going to list off the skills that we have in those languages. Okay, we're going to start with the caption. So the table caption is like a title, okay, and it sits right at the top. And inside here, we're going to just write my technical, or actually, you know what? Let's just do technical expertise, okay? And if you run that, you can see it there. But we're not done, because now we want to go to Font Awesome, and keep in mind we have the CDN. So we're going to go to fontawesome.com. We're going to go to the icons, and we're just going to type in code. And we don't even need to log in. We're going to find this code which is free. We don't want any pro because we have to pay for those. And we're just going to copy the HTML like we've done in prior code labs, okay? And we're going to paste in the HTML. And if you run it, now we have this technical expertise, which is fine. So that's it for the caption, so like so. But now we have to work on the table head. So that's our next section. And all you need to do is reference this here. So we're going to go table head, and we're going to have a closing table head. And inside here, we have table rows with table head cells. Okay, so table row, because we just want one row. And basically, you're going to put in the headings, so table heading, that you want. So you got to kind of do some outlaying or planning beforehand, because you need to know, okay, I can't really span 3 rows over, so we're going to put 2 rows, and we're actually going to have a combined row on the bottom for JavaScript. And so what does that look like? Well, this first one is going to be HTML5 for the table header, and the next one is going to be CSS3. Okay, and if you run that, well, we're going to see the CSS3 here. Oh, table row. Oh, sorry, I put that outside of the table header. There we go. All right, so it's starting to take shape, but we really don't have any data cells, and that's why it looks like that for now. Okay, but you can start to see, okay, I have my table headings. Great. All right, so we have our table headings, but inside these headings, I do want to add some font awesome icons. So let's go back to the website, and we're going to go HTML. So we're going to grab the first icon, which is HTML5, which is perfect. And we're going to throw it right before the HTML5. And we're going to use an entity or the non-breaking space right after the icon, just to give it some space. If you run it, we already have font awesome. You can see it gives it that nice space. So we're going to do the same thing for CSS. Go to fontawesome.com and just type in CSS. I'm going to grab CSS3, go back to our project, and we're going to do the same thing. Okay, and I should probably break up these table headers because they're both inside rows, just for readability's sake. There we go. Okay, and right before the CSS, or the text, and right after the icon, we want that non-breaking space. Okay, just so it's not clumped together. Right now it's clumped, but we're going to put some padding in there. Okay, so as long as you have this, you're good. The next part is we're going to work on the table body. So this is the main part of the table. Okay, so what does this look like? So we're going to have a lot of duplication. So instead of writing this out over and over again, we're just going to do a single table row, opening and closing. And inside the table row, we're going to have 2 data cells. So let's have that outline. Okay, so you can imagine, how do we figure this out? So 2 data cells because we have 2 table headers. Okay, so this first data cell is for HTML5, the second one is for CSS3, and we're going to see how that works in just a second. Let's write in our expertise for HTML5, and I'm just going to put semantic tags or labels, and then right below it will be our first table data cell for CSS expertise, and I'm going to put grid flexbox. Okay, and if you run that, have a look at it, you can see those align perfectly. Okay, yes, they're clumped together, but we still need to add some padding, and we're going to do that in the CSS in a bit. Okay, so that's good. But next, we need some more rows because that's not all of our expertise. So what we're going to do is copy the rows, and we're going to paste them 3 times over. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, and now for each table data cell, so this is going to be HTML, 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 HTML. The second data cell is CSS, 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 CSS. Okay, so you're going to write in. The first one's done for us. Second one, we're going to go media embeds for HTML. The third one, we'll say we're good at attributes. And then the final one here, we can put forms, okay, input forms. But let's start, let's finish CSS. So we have this grid flexbox repetition. We're going to put animations we're good at, and we haven't covered animations yet, but we will. responsive, so we know responsive design, and also graphic design. So those are important elements of each respective language. And if you run that now, you can see it's filling it out. Okay, but it still lacks formatting, and we do that with CSS. The next part of this here is for JavaScript. Because I wanted to save space, I couldn't go 3 across, so I'm going to put JavaScript as a single column right below that. And how do I do that? Well, what I want to do is I want to create a new kind of table row. But for this, we're inside this table row, we're going to have a table or a th for table heading. Okay, so let's put table row right underneath, like so, and we're going to have another table heading. So it's a little strange because it's below everything, but I'm using a th instead of a table data row cell because the th gives us that custom font, which is bold, and it also centers it automatically, and that's why we're using it. Okay, so inside this th, we're gonna go JavaScript. Okay, and if you run that, okay, so now we have the beginning, but we want this cell to span the 2. So how do we do that? Well, we actually use the column span attribute, and we equal that to 2 because we know we have 2 columns. And if we run that, then you can see if you expand it that JavaScript now spans the 2 columns, okay, because it's going to have its own column to work with, which is great. Okay, and we do that with column span. If you wanted, for instance, this HTML row or this column to span 2, you would do the same thing for this th. Or if you wanted this HTML to span all 5 rows here, you would put row span 5. Okay, so it's just an easy way using HTML to work out these layouts with tables. Okay, and HTML5 makes it so easy. But for JavaScript, we still need the icon. So what I'm going to do is go into Font Awesome, and we're going to go JavaScript. And you can see we do have a JavaScript icon. Well, of course, right? And let's go back to our project. We're just going to throw it in before the string, and we're also going to have the non-breaking space. Okay, so that's the ampersand and BSP for non-breaking space, and then the semicolon right after. Okay, so you kind of have that. All right, and if you run that, you can see all of our technical expertise is looking great. Okay, but we're not done because now we have to do the table data cells for JavaScript, keeping in mind we have 1 column. Okay, so for this, I'm just going to borrow one of these up here, and we're going to pare it down here. So this is a table row. We're going to create another table row, but we're just going to have one table data cell. Okay, so let's get rid of the other one. And well, you can write this manually. So again, we have this new table row, which is a header. So it acts as a new header. And we have to think of this as almost our table part 2, a new table in a table, if you will. And we're just going to write things like our expertise in JavaScript. So JavaScript, a big part of JavaScript is functions. So I'm going to put functions in the table data cells. But if you run that now, you see it's on the leftmost side. So for this, we have to put in the column span attribute in the table data cell. And we have to equal that to 2. So for each, oops, sorry, not the TD. That should be, yeah, well, that should be for the TD. Let's see, for functions, table row, table row. Okay, that's fine for now. I think we just have to align the text to center. But if you were to inspect it, you can see actually it does span the two. Okay, it just and if you go to main, you can see. Oh, hold on. If let's see, where's our grid? So we have the grid, and inside the body or the table. If we go down to the functions, you can see that data cell spans 2 columns, so that's working as intended. Okay. But now we want to copy this, the table row, and we're going to paste it 3 times over again. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, because we want to span twice, but we're going to change these now because maybe you are good at event handlers. So JavaScript is one of those event-driven programming languages. We also deal with things like loops, for each loops, mappings, for loops, and then also control flows or if-else statements, okay, which is it can be basic logic all the way to more powerful logic. So if you run that now, we finally have all of our kind of table laid out, but we do have to do some styling or graphic design, but it's looking good so far. Okay, so we have all that mapped out. Good job. What I would suggest is if you need to look at the code, just pause the video and make sure it looks as it does here. So I'll pause that, and then we'll go up, and you can see our table is not that elaborate. It spans from here to here. All right, perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the CSS now. Okay, so right after header, we're going to write in some items. So right after header, we're going to target our newly created table, and we're going to give it some properties. First is a background color. And I am going to change this background color to, instead of just a plain color, we're going to make it a little more fancy. We're going to actually do what's called a linear gradient. So this is more of the graphic design part of the background. And this linear gradient value, it takes the direction as the first argument. So we're actually going to put to bottom. So where's this gradient heading towards? So to bottom. And then we pass in the colors. So light blue, and I'm going to put in F or white, which matches the background. So if you run that, and radial gradient works similarly, but as far as implementation, it's pretty simple. You have background, you set it to linear gradient, you set the direction, you set the first color and the last. And you can also set things like percentages, okay? I'm not going to use percentages, but you can also set percentages to get the exacting blend that you want, okay? So right now you can see it just gives that effect where it kind of fades off, and that's exactly what we want. Okay. All right. The next thing is I'm going to give the table a border radius all around of 10 pixels. Okay. I'm also going to give internal padding, so space on the inside of its internal elements of 5 pixels all around. And I'm also going to give a margin top of 20 pixels. Okay, so that'll push the whole table down the page because I found it's a little high. Okay, so if you run that, you can see things are getting sorted out. Okay, but we still have to add padding to these table data cells, the headers, and so on. So we're done with the table. Let's move on to a chain selector. So we have table, we're targeting the table, table header and the data cell. Okay. Oops. I just want everything lined up here. Okay. And inside here, we're actually going to create the border. So the first argument is the 1px, so how big is the border? The next would be solid. You could actually do dotted and other patterns there. And then the final argument, or value rather, is the color. And I'm going to set it to white, just so it doesn't clash too much. Okay, so if you run that, you can see, well, we have borders around our table headers, our table itself, as well as the TD or table data cells. Okay. This next property is called border collapse, and I'm going to set that to collapse. And what this does is, if you see the borders, there is spacing there, and I want that gone. So we use this property, border collapse. And if you run that, see that spacing is now gone. Perfect. Okay, and then finally, because everything's bunched up together, we're going to provide some padding for these cells and the table itself. So 5px all around. If you run that, there you go. Our table is looking quite nice now. Nice and spaced out. But we're not done yet. I did make some tweaks here, so apart from the chaining. So keep in mind that if you don't include the table header and table data and the table itself, it's going to look a little crazy. So make sure you're selecting those elements. And I'm going to select just the table header now. And for the table header, we're going to create a shorthand form of border radius. So the border radius property will set the border radius all the way around. Notice how we don't have any border radius for the headers. And actually, we could leave it like that. But I just want to show you an implementation. So we're targeting the headers. If I want to just get the tops, so the top left, top right, I can go 5px for the top left, 5px for the top right, 0px for the right bottom, and 0px for the left bottom. Okay, and I can get the same effect. But that would be the shorthand version. Okay. Otherwise, if you just have 5px, well, it's going to be all the way around. So this way, you can actually set the bottom right, bottom left to 0px, and they'll remain straight. Okay, FYI. The next part of this is I want some more padding in the table heading cells. So I'm going to increase that. I'm going to set the background to light blue because I want to set the headers a little bit differently than the rest of the cells. Okay. They should be more pronounced, and then also the text color. So we're going to change that to, what do I have here? Oh, black. Okay, they're already black, but set it to black. And you can see here, now that kind of gives our headers a more pronounced look, especially the JavaScript, right? So that looks great. All right. Whoops. Okay, so we're done with the headers, and of course you have your own creative control. So if you're dealing with other projects, you could really kind of have anything you want as far as the colors. I'm just going to leave it at that just to make it simple. Okay. All right, so the next part of this is we are going to affect the nav. So the nav, I found the background color just clashed a bit with the table. So I'm going to reset the nav color, and we're just going to set it to E, this E value, this hex code. Okay, and notice how it's not working because this nav background is actually already set in our external style sheet. So in order to override that, I have to use the important. And there we go. So I found rather that it looked a little bit better that way. Okay, perfect. All right. Let's see. There's one thing I want to do. It looks like this is not filling out. The table's not filling out as I like it. So we can actually go back to our main and actually the main is set, so we should have that 60% width. I believe it would be, let's see, manage. Just have to make sure. Yeah, because my table is looking pretty small. So what I wanted to change here is perhaps these settings on the main. So if we, instead of one fractional unit, if we put 60, let's see what that does. No. Okay, so that doesn't affect any change, which means that what we need to do, actually I want to just try this for 1 sec. No, okay. So that really didn't do anything. Okay, so it's really just the table that we're focused on. It looks like the table is not filling out the dimensions here. So let's see if we can give it perhaps some extra padding, 15 pixels. Okay, so I see what's happening here. It looks like, oh no, okay. Looks like we just need to make some adjustments here. All right, so let me go to, let's see, oh, the nav. And I just want to make sure, I believe in the nav, what we did is, if you notice here in the nav, it's kind of spaced out and we don't need all of that. So we can go margin left and we can set that to a negative margin. I think that's what I did. And I'm going to make sure it's overridden in case there's any negative margin already there. So let's go 12 instead. Perfect. Perfect. All right. And I just want to just have a look here. Okay, so in my example, the table actually acts as a sort of a flex box, but right now it is just, it's not growing. Of course, we set it to grid, and I just want to try some things here. Okay. So justify content center, and it almost seems like that justify content is not working as it should be. Because if we have two grids right here spanning horizontally, it looks like this table is clinging to the left or the start. And what I think I need to do is make sure that this table is wrapped properly. So we do have it in a div. Just give me 1 second. Table. Okay. So actually, I think that's the problem, is this div. So I stand corrected. So let's get rid of this div right above the table. Sorry about that. And let's run it. There we go. Okay, so a lot better. Okay. I was just curious as to why that was not working. So just make sure you have those grid items there. Okay, and Now we have kind of things clinging, so all we need to do here is provide some additional padding or even margin. So let's start with margin here. Yeah, that works. So you can add margin of 20 pixels there. Or even, and that's in the table. Let's just go 15. Perfect. All right, so things are looking good. The next part here is we want to go up. I think as the last step here, I just put in some box shadow for this image. And in order to do that, well, you need to find out, okay, well, where's the image? And that's right inside the figure here. So in order to select that, you would have to just provide context. So we have figure and then the image. So let's go up to the CSS. We're going to go figure image. And all we need to do is provide some box shadow. So let's go box shadow. And this is equal to, the first part of it is X, the X-axis offset or the horizontal offset. And we're just going to have this set to, let's put that to 0 for now, because I just want a vertical offset or the y-axis. So let's set that to 2px. This third value is the diffusion, so let's set that to 5, and then the final value is the actual color of the box shadow. And if you run that, we have a true box shadow. So in order to get this shadow in line with the image, we just provide a border radius. Okay. And 37 pixels does the trick, I believe. Okay, there you go. And now it's wrapped around if you run that. Whoops. Okay, so that's looking good. The final part of that is, if you'll notice, we need to make it a little responsive. So if the user is contracting this, things are just squished. There's really no space for these two items. So we have to pick and choose at least one of them. I'm going to use a media query tag to get rid of this whole table if it's contracted less than 800 pixels. So if the viewport's less than 800 pixels, this table will be set to display none. So how do we do that? Well, let's go up to CSS and we use what we learned. So the media query, and it's written like this. So only screen and then we go max width of 6, actually let's go 800 pixels. Okay. And this is kind of like the outer container. So what this is saying is this CSS styling will only apply when the viewport is 800 pixels or less. Okay, anything above that and things will be normal. Okay, so you have this wrapper and inside you put the selectors that you want to change. So in this case, the table, okay, opening and closing, and I'm going to set the table display property to none, which means if it's less than 800 pixels wide, the viewport, this table disappears, okay? If you run that, but we just have one problem. So this is working, but this about me defaults to the left side. Ideally, I want this in the middle. So how do I do that? Well, I have to change the main now. So it's set in the main, okay? The grid template columns, okay? So I actually want to set the grid template columns to 1 fractional unit. So instead of 2 columns, I just have 1. And what that'll do is center this about me. Okay, and if you run that, you can see after 800 pixels is passed or contracted to, this table disappears and then the About Me section takes over the whole main. Okay, so exactly the behavior we're looking for. All right, so that concludes our code lab for today. So we've dealt with quite a few different topics. Setting background images, font faces, even linear gradients, and building a table inside our developer profile using box shadows and so on. So I hope you enjoyed. That's it for today, and we'll see you next time.